family of 4 disappeared from their California home, leaving behind almost everything they owned. Their cars, their pets, and their belongings were still there, but the family itself was gone. For years, investigators couldn't determine whether they had walked away voluntarily or whether something much darker had happened. Then, a discovery in the desert finally revealed the truth. This is the story of the McStay family disappearance. On February 4, 2010, Joseph McStay was living a normal life with his wife Summer and their 2 young sons, Johnny and Joseph Jr. Joseph owned a decorative fountain business, and the family had recently moved into their home in Fallbrook, California. That afternoon, Joseph handled business calls and communicated with clients. Nothing about his conversations suggested trouble. Later that evening, the family was believed to be at home. Then the communication stopped. Calls went unanswered. Messages received no response. And within days, the people closest to the McStays realized something was seriously wrong. When investigators entered the home, they found a strange scene. The house was not destroyed. There were no obvious signs of violence. But there were clues that something didn't add up. The family's dogs were still there. Their belongings remained inside. It didn't look like a family preparing to leave forever. It looked like they had stepped out expecting to come back. Then investigators discovered their SUV abandoned in a parking lot hundreds of miles away. And that changed the entire case. When investigators found the McStay family's SUV, they hoped it would finally reveal what happened. Instead, it created more questions. The vehicle was discovered near a shopping center in San Diego County. It appeared to have been left there for days, but there was no clear evidence showing why. At first, the discovery supported one theory. Maybe Joseph and Summer had decided to leave. The location was close to the Mexican border, and investigators considered the possibility that the family had crossed into Mexico voluntarily. But the people who knew the McStays struggled with that explanation. They had 2 young children. They had a home. They had a business. They had responsibilities and relationships they were unlikely to abandon without telling anyone. Then investigators found another important clue. Security footage from the area showed 4 figures walking near the parking lot around the time the SUV was left behind. The footage was grainy, but investigators believed it showed 2 adults and 2 children, the same number of people who had disappeared. However, the video could not clearly identify them. It didn't answer the biggest question. Were these the McStays? Or was someone trying to make it appear as if the family had left on their own? As months passed, the case became more complicated. There was no confirmed crime scene, no clear motive, no obvious suspect. Investigators followed hundreds of leads, but nothing explained why an entire family had vanished. Then attention began turning toward Joseph's business dealings. Detectives examined his professional relationships and the people around him. They wanted to know if someone close to the family had a reason to harm them. But once again, the evidence was limited. The investigation reached a frustrating point. The McStay family was missing. Their vehicle had been found. A mysterious video existed, but the truth remained hidden. For nearly 3 years, the case stayed unsolved. Then, a discovery in the California desert changed everything. In November 2013, a motorcyclist riding through the Mojave Desert discovered something disturbing. 4 sets of human remains were found buried in a shallow grave near Victorville, California. Authorities immediately began investigating whether the remains could belong to the missing McStay family. The location was significant. It was not far from areas connected to the family's disappearance. For years, investigators had searched for answers. Now, they finally had a possible explanation. DNA testing confirmed the worst. The remains belonged to Joseph McStay, his wife Summer, and their 2 sons. The family that had disappeared in 2010 had been found. But discovering what happened was only the beginning. Now investigators had to answer a much harder question. Who killed them? The case that had been treated as a missing persons investigation was now officially a murder investigation. And detectives began looking back at every piece of evidence they had collected over the previous 3 years. One person quickly became a focus of the investigation. Joseph's former business associate, Charles Chase Merritt. Merritt had worked with Joseph and was one of the last people known to have contact with him. Investigators began examining his movements after the family disappeared. They found evidence that raised new questions. Authorities believed Merritt had been involved in the family's deaths and later attempted to cover up what happened. In 2014, he was arrested and charged with the murders of Joseph, Summer, and their 2 sons. But the case was far from over, because investigators still needed to prove what happened inside the McStay home. And why? When investigators shifted their focus to Chase Merritt, they weren't relying on a confession or an eyewitness. They were building a case piece by piece. Merritt had worked closely with Joseph McStay. The two had done business together for years, and on the surface they appeared to be friends. But detectives soon discovered their business relationship wasn't as stable as it seemed. Financial records revealed Joseph had been dealing with growing concerns over money connected to the business. Investigators also learned that Merritt had continued using Joseph's business checks after the family disappeared. According to prosecutors, some of those checks had been forged. Then detectives looked at Merritt's phone records. They showed his phone traveling through areas investigators believed were connected to the murders and the burial site around the time the family vanished. While none of the evidence alone proved he committed the murders, prosecutors argued that, together, it painted a clear picture. Merritt denied every allegation. His defense argued that the investigation had focused too heavily on him while ignoring other possible suspects. They questioned the timeline. They challenged the forensic evidence. And they argued there was no direct evidence placing Merritt at the scene of the murders. The trial became a battle between circumstantial evidence and reasonable doubt. Jurors spent months listening to testimony from investigators, forensic experts, financial analysts, and people who knew both men. The prosecution claimed greed had led to murder. The defense insisted the case was built on assumptions. Nearly a decade after the McStay family disappeared, the jury reached its decision. In 2019, Chase Merritt was found guilty of murdering Joseph, Summer, Johnny, and Joseph Jr. He was later sentenced to death, although that sentence remains affected by California's ongoing moratorium on executions. Even after the verdict, not everyone was convinced. Some believed investigators had solved the case. Others argued important questions still remained unanswered. No one knows exactly where the family was killed. No one knows precisely what happened during their final hours. And no one can say with complete certainty why 2 young children became victims alongside their parents. But one thing is no longer a mystery. The McStay family didn't choose to disappear. Their story ended in violence. For years, friends hoped they had simply started a new life somewhere else. Instead, they had been lying in a remote stretch of the California desert, waiting to be found. Their disappearance became one of America's most well-known missing family cases. Not because they vanished without a trace, but because the truth took years to catch up with the crime. Sometimes the biggest mystery isn't who disappeared. It's how long the truth can remain buried before someone finally uncovers it. This has been Ethos Stories.